All right. 3, 2, 1. Happy Saturday, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the first ever edition of the Kota Cappers College Football Computer Show with myself at Kota Capper Pace, and of course, Dan the Computer Man, as he is known at the network here, Dan Angel 11. And Dan, we might have to workshop that title a little bit, but at least it tells you and the people what we're talking about here. So how's it going today, Dan?
Not too bad. Hopefully, the computer will be a little bit more consistent across the time slots. This past week, it was more early time slot was strong, late time slot not so much. So hoping for a little more across the board. But if it turns out that one time slot's stronger than the other, that's just the way it goes.
Yeah, for sure. Now, Dan, you've been doing this, your algorithm for the computer rankings for, I think, 5 years. And if you follow the Kota Sports Gambling Network, Dan wrote up a nice blog before the college football season, kind of explaining how it all works. But Dan, just quickly, let the people know if they haven't seen that blog. What are these rankings and how do they work here?
So basically, the ratings are a kind of a mathematical analysis of how strong a team is relative to other teams across the country. So what I've found for college football is that a rating in the 40s tends to tell you that this is a quality team, like a New Year's Six caliber team. A rating in the high 50s says this is a playoff team, or has the potential to do that. And something where Georgia is, which Georgia is in, I think at like 74 almost, is if they can hold that, that basically enters the conversation of all-time level, because those are numbers that are barely even approached. So the ratings will change each week, excuse me, depending on how you do on the field versus what the computer thought you would do on the field. So basically, like Clemson Wake Forest this week, the computer is expecting that that game's going to be fairly close, and Clemson is a small favorite, I think, on 1 point. So if Clemson goes in there and blows Wake's doors off, wins by 20, the computer will adjust their rating upward a fair amount. If it's pretty close to what the computer thought would happen, then the rating will look pretty similar the next week.
Yeah, for sure. Now, again, Dan, I know you wrote in your blog, if you like moneyline parlays, this is a great place to start. And I can't echo that enough. Dan does a great job with all this stuff. He puts in a lot of work. So the computer trends, Dan, I don't know if this is from this year or just kind of collectively, but 75% of the time, the computer picks the outright winner correctly. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's somewhere between 70 to 75%, and that's over the course of all 6 years that I've done this. It was a little bit more accurate when I was using it for high school teams, because there's just no roster turnover there, as opposed to college with the transfer portal. With high school teams, it tended to win about between 80 and 85% of the time, but I found that 70 to 75% is a pretty good expectation of where the final number will be at the end of the season.
Yeah, for sure. And on the spread, 55%. That's a good number right there too.
Yeah, it tends to be about somewhere around 53, 54%. So I mean, you're winning money. So that's the important thing.
That's the goal that we're all trying to do here at the Kota Sports Gambling Network. So again, you can follow Dan on Twitter at DanAngel11. He drops a blog or two. He does power conferences and non-power 5 conferences every week. So you can check that out as well. KotaSportsCappers.com. Well, Dan, let's get into it, man. You talked about Clemson and Wake Forest a little bit here. So we'll kind of go to my next game I have on the ACC slate. Notre Dame taking on North Carolina. Now, on the college football show, and even on Mount Lockmore this week, I called North Carolina a lock of all locks. I got it on +1. It's now moved a little bit here to North Carolina is now a slight favorite here. But Dan, why do you think, and what's the computer thinking here for Notre Dame over 1 on North Carolina here today?
All right, so here you've exposed one of the small weaknesses that the computer does have, in that it cannot immediately adjust for a quarterback change or a severe injury. And Notre Dame has been through a quarterback change. So for the next couple of weeks, the Irish might be a little bit overrated in the computer's eyes, because the computer still has to filter out the numbers of last season and its expectations for Notre Dame when it still had Buchner under center. So it's still adjusting to that point. Also, North Carolina didn't really play all that strong of a opening schedule on paper. I mean, Florida A&M is a game that did not count because I'm still trying to figure out where FCS teams fall in the ratings. Next year, I'll have it figured out because there'll be a season of data into the computer, but that's going to take time. So that game was just not counted. App State, close game all the way. Georgia State, that didn't do anything to help North Carolina's numbers. So Carolina might be a little bit underrated. This might be one of the few times where there's a good reason to go against the computer. Like what I've found is I will go against the computer when I think I have a very good reason to do so. And an injury to a quarterback and a team still adjusting to that is one of those reasons.
You bring up a great point there, Dan. So when does a person, a handicapper, like, hey, when should I go against the computer? You're kind of touched on a little bit there, but any other advantages to going against the computer or knowing when you should?
Weather is a big one. Like if there's going to be just weather that is really going to make it tough conditions for the players, or if it's just really out of season, that might be in a time to think, okay, this might be a time to go with my gut instead of what the computer's saying. Or if a team's just shown no momentum whatsoever the past few weeks and it's later in the season. Like one great example was Oregon down the stretch last year was clearly out of gas, but the numbers hadn't caught up with that because at the start of the season, the computer understood that Oregon was a pretty good team. So it was thinking, okay, this is still a talented team, maybe not as good as they were at the start of the season, but they're still good. But they were clearly running on fumes and Utah just crushed them twice. So basically, if you're at the point where your eyes have been telling you something for a few weeks, that might be the time to look at going a different way.
For sure. All right, let's slide down to the Big 12 here, Dan. Kansas and Duke, obviously two teams, 3-0, both very good against the spread so far this season. Kansas -7.5, -7, depending the book. You have the computer, or the computer has them over Duke by 13 points. What do you like here?
Yeah, so I took a dart on Kansas in our team draft, and I thought the Jayhawks would be better than they were the past year. I didn't think they'd get this much better this quickly. I mean, Kansas's offense is really solid. Like it's looking like those old Buffalo teams that Lance Leipold built that were so heavy on the ground. And Duke has not played anyone impressive. Like the Blue Devils, 3 wins. Temple is horrendous.
Yep.
Northwestern looked like a decent win at the start of the season, but the Wildcats just lost to Southern Illinois. And that game was counted because as I'm adjusting with the FCS ratings, I've put in a rule that if you manage to lose the game to the FCS team, you're getting penalized for that. So that game is getting counted in on that situation. So Duke just really hasn't done anything that impressive. I mean, they've done some things that are fairly impressive for what was expected of them at the start of the year. I mean, 3-0 is a nice start for the Blue Devils, but Kansas has gone to Houston and picked up a win. They've beaten West Virginia, and they've looked really good for these first 3 weeks. And I think the Jayhawks playing in Lawrence, they're going to get a pretty comfortable victory here.
Yeah, they are at home. Obviously, Duke maybe a little bit better defensively, but again, like Dan said, they haven't played anybody. Kansas is scoring, but they're also giving up a ton of points too.
Mm-hmm.
The next game here on the slate for the Big 12 action here, Dan, we got 2 here to finish off the Big 12. Kansas is -6.5. The computer has them over 12, or that's gonna trip me up the whole time.
Texas
-6.5. The computer has them winning by 12 or more here over Texas Tech. What's the computer like for this game?
So the main thing that the computer likes is that Texas very nearly beat Alabama. Like that's another thing that can sometimes be going trick the computer a little bit, is sometimes when you schedule a top team out of conference, like just for playing the game, you're going to get a bonus because there's just no way that said top team can beat you by what the computer thinks they're going to beat you by. Like South Carolina almost actually had its rating go up in losing by 41 to Georgia. So that said, Texas actually came in, like the computer actually did pick Texas against the spread because the spread in that game with Alabama was tied by 20.5, and the computer liked Alabama by 20. So it went with the Longhorns there. And sticking close to Alabama like that is going to shoot you up in the numbers. So the computer is still operating under the assumption that Alabama is an outstanding team. Texas was 1 point away from being. Texas is probably a pretty good team. So with Texas playing that game against a middling Texas Tech team, yeah, it's liking on the Longhorns in that situation.
Longhorns have won 4 straight against Texas Tech as well. So very interesting there too. So Oklahoma, Dan, the last Big 12 one we'll talk about here. They are minus 12.5 currently over Kansas State. The computer has them by 18 points here.
Yeah, worries me a little bit because I just don't know what to think about Kansas State.
Mm-hmm.
Like Kansas State looked like that was a fantastic play by the computer and made me a nice chunk of change when the Wildcats crushed Missouri, which that one was a game where the computer was all over the Wildcats. But then Kansas State turned around and lost to Tulane. And the computer really does not like being proven wrong. The computer was very high on the Wildcats going up against the Green Wave. And when you manage to lose the game and you're expected to win comfortably, you're going to get punished, especially early in the season. So the computer also does not take into account the fact that Kansas State has traditionally been very competitive with Oklahoma under Chris Kleiman. So this might be one where it's overrating Oklahoma a little bit. The Sooners also did get a boost from basically being the last team to face Nebraska before the remnants of the quote unquote best 3-9 team of all time were completely washed away. So I think the Sooners might be a bit inflated there, but again, I'm not sure what to make of Kansas State, and neither is the computer at this point.
Yeah, for sure. They were 14-point favorites, home favorites, and lost outright last week to Tulane?
Yeah, lost outright. I think it was 17-10, and that's another thing. In the case of a low-scoring battle, which is why Iowa and Iowa State end up with higher ratings than everyone expects every year. The computer does give a bonus for playing good defense. So a 17-10 game like Tulane played against Kansas State, which in the computer's eyes was a 20-10 game because Tulane was the road team, so they get a 3-point bonus in the score that the computer sees to offset the home field. That's going to be worth more than if it was 30-20. So even though it's the same margin of victory. So Tulane got a big boost from that. Kansas State got an equal punishment.
Yeah, for sure. Let's talk about Iowa here in the Big Ten. Dan, they're minus 7.5 taking on Rutgers. The computer has them by 19 points. What do you like here?
The computer really got scared by the fact that Rutgers nearly lost to Temple.
Yep.
I talked about how Georgia is in rarefied air at 74. Temple came into that game at Rutgers as a -9, which, if you can do the math there, means that if Georgia were to play Temple at Sanford Stadium, the computer would have Georgia giving 86 points before that Rutgers game. So
that's insane.
Yeah. So Temple is basically like UMass level, or at least it was before that game. Temple is still not very high, but Rutgers took a pretty big penalty for almost getting beaten that game. And Iowa's still a great defensive team, shutting out Nevada 27-0. The computer saw that game as a 24-0 win, but that's treated like a 30-point win. And it still thinks Nevada is at least somewhat decent from last year because it doesn't know that Nevada lost so many players in the transfer portal. So Iowa's probably a little overrated. Rutgers, the computer is not sure. So that could be one where it's a little bit closer than the computer thinks. And Iowa could certainly be in trouble here because the Hawkeyes offense, oh my God.
Not good. Not good indeed. Let's talk about Michigan and Maryland. I have this one circled. I like Michigan here. They're minus 16.5. The computer has them by about 25 points over Maryland. So what do you think here?
I think the computer is pretty accurate on this one. Maryland has had 6 cracks at Jim Harbaugh, 4 coaches in that time span. And the Terrapins have never once come within 21 points. So this has just been one-way traffic, and Michigan looks really freaking good. Granted, they're playing three nobodies to start the year. I mean, when the best team you've played is Colorado State, that's not exactly challenging, but they did what was expected of them. Like, they destroyed all three opponents, and JJ McCarthy was going to be the starter anyway. I mean, Cade McNamara getting hurt doesn't affect Michigan whatsoever. Plus, Maryland last week against SMU had the Terrapins dead to rights, but could not hang on to the football. And not only did the Mustangs turn it over three times, but they also had 2 4th-down conversions get stopped. So Michigan is not going to give the ball away anywhere near as much as SMU did. And the mistakes Maryland made against SMU, Michigan's going to punish that and turn those into touchdowns. So I think the Wolverines roll here.
Yeah, I agree with you. And Maryland, too, very undisciplined team. I think they're averaging like right around 8 to 9 turnovers a game, something crazy like that. So playing a good
penalties, you mean?
Penalties. Sorry. Yep. Sorry.
Yeah,
penalties.
they were averaging 8 to 9 turnovers a game.
Yeah,
We'd be
no.
territory.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So excuse me. So penalties. So going up against a good Michigan team, a very disciplined team, this could get out of hand. So I think I like the computer thoughts on this one. Let's go to the Pac-12. Again, another one. Everybody seems to be on Oregon State. Here, USC -6.5, taking on the Beavers. Kind of a really true first road test, I guess, but USC -6.5. The computer has USC by 1 point here, Dan.
Yeah, so Oregon State has played USC very well in Corvallis. USC has lost 4 of their past 6 trips to Razor Stadium, and the computer still isn't sure what to make of Boise State, which Oregon State blasted in week 1. So the computer right now is erring on the side of Boise State is still a pretty decent team, so Oregon State must be a pretty good team. So it hasn't gotten any evidence to the contrary on Oregon State. And I think USC hasn't really seen anyone up to the Beavers level, and facing a hostile situation here, this could be an upset. Like, I went back and forth with this and the game that I actually did pick as my upset of the week, which was Washington State. Like, I think both the Cougars and the Beavers could come away victorious this week.
Yeah, it should be an interesting contest there up there. And I'm excited for that. USC kind of looks like a wagon right now, Dan, but the Beavers look good too, and they both played Fresno State too. You got to keep that in mind as well.
Yeah, although Oregon State, I believe, was on the road.
Yeah, this is true. This is true. So, yeah, you always got to keep that in mind as well. All right, let's head to the SEC. Another big one, Tennessee and Florida. You have Tennessee at home -10.5. They're looking really strong right now. Florida, their quarterback, I think, has more tackles than touchdowns. But the Volunteers, Dan, the computer has them by at least 23 points against Florida. So what do you see in this one?
I mean, Tennessee has basically beaten up on the teams that it's played in non-conference when it was expected to win, and did what it needed to do against a pretty good Pittsburgh team. Whereas Florida, the computer has pretty much decided that the game against Utah was a complete fluke. Like, since then, the computer has seen Kentucky go into the swamp and basically shut Florida down in the second half. And South Florida, who is not a good football team, nearly come out of Gainesville with a win. Like, the computer was willing to give Florida a little bit of a benefit of the doubt when they lost to Kentucky because it thinks Kentucky is good. It's pretty clear that South Florida is not a good football team. So seeing that was what really punished the Gators. So the computer is very high on Tennessee. I think it has the Vols rated 6th in the nation.
Okay.
So, yeah, I think it's only Georgia, Ohio State, Alabama, Michigan, and Penn State who are sitting ahead of Tennessee. So it's very high on the Vols. And I mean, Tennessee has lost 16 of 17 in this rivalry, and this is the best chance that they've had in a long time to really put a hurting on Florida. And Florida also hasn't played a road game yet. So yeah, I think Tennessee is in a very comfortable spot here.
Yeah, should be a very good game as well there in the SEC. All right, we don't really have to touch on this one, Dan, but I did think it was interesting. Georgia is -45.5 against Kent State. Computer has them by 64 points. I always have a tough time, laying big numbers like that. But hey, if a win's a win, you got to take it.
Yeah, so I think this is actually possible, and the reasons are because Georgia I mean, their defense is outstanding. Their offense is pretty dang underrated. I mean, Stetson Bennett has picked up right where he left off. And Kent State plays so fast that I think that's going to backfire on them in this game. Like, normally the flash fast offense leads to a lot of possessions, a lot of points, and some video game numbers for Kent State. Against Georgia, it's going to lead to a lot of quick 3-and-outs. And what, like, we saw in the MAC championship game last year when Northern Illinois handled Kent State pretty good after losing the first time, that when you get Kent State off the field pretty quickly, they do not have the defense to stop a team from doing what they want with the football. Northern Illinois, who has a similar talent level to Kent State, chose to keep the clock moving and keep Kent State's offense anchored to the sidelines. Georgia, which has a much superior talent level, is just going to put up a lot of points. So, yeah, I think it's going to be very close to the spread, because I don't think Kirby Smart is going to feel the need to humiliate the Flashes. But with how fast Kent State plays, this number's in play.
Yeah, you never know. You never know. Another one here, Dan. Mississippi is a minus 21.5 point favorite against Tulsa, but the computer only has Mississippi by 11 points here. So thoughts on this one?
Yeah, Tulsa's kind of a weird one. The computer is basically not getting a read on the Golden Hurricane at all. I mean, so far, Tulsa has played 2 games that were really close to start the season with Northern Illinois and Wyoming. They managed to lose to Wyoming, and then they destroyed Jacksonville State, which, even though it's an FCS team, because they're transitioning, games against Jacksonville State do count. So that might be pushing Tulsa's number up a little bit. And Mississippi, it's still not completely sure what to think of the Rebels without Matt Corral. I mean, they came up huge against Georgia Tech, but Georgia Tech is terrible.
No, spot on. All right, so there's our Power 5 conferences. Dan, I have a few non-Power 5 conferences as well. Some interesting numbers here. So we can start in the American. You have Memphis minus 12.5 against North Texas. The computer has Memphis by 21 points here. So thoughts on this one?
All right, so North Texas, I mean, the computer initially thought, okay, this is a pretty solid team after they beat UTEP, which was a computer darling last year. But the computer has quickly realized that UTEP is not the same UTEP of 2021, and North Texas's win over them was not a sign that they were a good team. The Mean Green quickly got creamed by both SMU and UNLV, and that UNLV result in particular really sent their rating down. So it thinks Memphis is the way to go here. I mean, Memphis beating Navy and Arkansas State fairly comfortable isn't that impressive, but they did what they were expected to do, and getting beat at Mississippi State isn't that terrible. So it's thinking that Memphis is a decent team and North Texas is just not a good team and just caught another fairly weak team on the right day.
An independent team here, Dan, the Liberty Flames minus 26.5 against Akron. The computer has them by 40 points here.
I mean, there's only so much you can do when facing Akron. Akron is one of the few unfortunate teams who is currently sitting in negative numbers. Akron, Florida International, and Massachusetts are the 3 teams that the computer has with a rating below 0. I think Akron is like a negative 6.5. So that, and Liberty nearly took down Wake Forest. Mm-hmm. So that really helped the Flames rating, and the computer is expecting the Flames to just roast Akron here.
Let's head to the Mountain West. UNLV minus 2.5, taking on Utah State. But damn, the computer, Dan, has UNLV by 17 points here.
Yeah, well, you know what I said about that whole, if you manage to lose to an FCS team, True. That game's going to count against you.
Yep.
Did you see what happened the last time Utah State took the field?
Weber State, right? I did see that.
Weber State, and they lost by 4 touchdowns.
Incredible. Now, Weber State's pretty solid FCS team, but
Weber
still.
State is a very good FCS team. Yep. I mean, they were when I was out there, and they're still pretty solid. But still, you cannot lose to an FCS team by 4 touchdowns and expect the computer to not adjust very, very harshly. So Utah State's rating is just a disaster right now, and the computer is thinking that 2 weeks off is not going to help, and UNLV is going to coast.
Awesome. I love it. I have UNLV on my card. I looked at Dan's ratings, saw that. I was like, I have to do that. And again, losing to Weber State's not great, but I still think UNLV, even on the road, is better than Utah State. So Sun Belt here, Dan, we got 2 to finish off the show. Then we could give some picks as well. We got South Alabama minus 13.5, taking on LA Tech. Computer has South Alabama, though, by 21 points. What do you think here?
Yeah. So Louisiana Tech, and I think they're in a tough spot here because South Alabama, if they had won that game against UCLA, then they'd probably be coming in just looking past that game, but they lost by a point. So they're coming off losing a close game against a pretty okay Pac-12 team, and the computer has seen them do that and go up to Central Michigan and get a win. So the computer's thinking, okay, this is a pretty good Sun Belt team that we're looking at here. And Louisiana Tech, I mean, it managed to give up 48 points to Clemson, and we've talked at length about DJ Uiagalelei's struggles with throwing the football. And when you're giving up 48 to Clemson, 52 to Missouri, and both of those games you lose by 4 touchdowns, the computer is not going to be the least bit impressed.
Yeah, I was looking at some of those scores too that Louisiana Tech played, and you like, oh, they only lost to the Clemson, by 28 or whatever it was. They put up 20 points, but all of those points were like scored in the fourth quarter. Obviously with Clemson's second, third, fourth stringers in. So again, when you're looking at these scores, I can't harp on this enough because I know some people do it. Maybe some casual bettors are like, oh, they only lost by 28 to Clemson. Well, yeah, but when were those scored? What was the game situation like and things like that? So again, these computer rankings can help you tremendously. This is where you should start. So Dan, the last one I like here, Louisiana minus 9.5, taking on Louisiana Monroe. I took Louisiana Monroe as my upset pick. This doesn't look good for me because the computer has Louisiana by 17 or more against Louisiana Monroe. So what do you like here?
Yeah. I mean, it also doesn't look all that good for you because Louisiana Monroe is 1-9-1 ATS against Louisiana in their past 11 meetings. So
they're due, Dan. They're due.
Do we think that the Dandelion is due to beat the Bulldozer at any time soon?
This is true. That's a good analogy.
I mean, to be completely fair, Louisiana Monroe, it would be very, very difficult to expect them to do anything more than they did with their early schedule. I mean, they cruised past Nicholls State, which that game didn't count for the ratings, and their other 2 games were Texas and Alabama. So they were always going to get creamed in both of those games. Louisiana, the computer is still figuring out what to make of them because, I mean, this clearly isn't the same Sun Belt power that has dominated the past couple seasons. I mean, losing to Rice, that's a red flag. Mm-hmm. So this might be one of those situations where going against the computer is not a terrible idea because this might be one where the computer is still washing off the remnants of last year. And Louisiana's first 2 games were an FCS game that didn't count and beating up on Eastern Michigan, which they were expected to do. The jury is still out whether the loss against Rice was just a fluke or a red flag. I don't know here. I mean, I think this is one where I'm just not confident enough in what Louisiana is to bet it either way. So it's not a bad play to take a dart on Louisiana Monroe to possibly pull the upset at home, but history says it's not going to happen.
Yeah, we'll see what can happen. It's kind of a situational spot for me too. Obviously, like you said, Louisiana losing to Rice, and then now next week they got a big game against South Alabama. So that could be huge too. It could be a decent spot for Louisiana Monroe, but we'll see.
That's true.
We will see. So
that is true.
There we go. All right, Dan, that's the show. I want to end every show with let's kind of start a little contest here. I know it's week 3, but that's fine. You pick your top play. I'll pick my top play. And then at the end of the year, we'll see who has the better record. How's that sound?
Okay.
All right. So we'll let you go first here.
All right. Well, I mean, my top play is Michigan. I mean, I'm just actually, no, wait. I made Michigan my lock of the week, so I'm going to do something different here, and I'm going to do this based on how the computer is reading them. Penn State, the computer has just had pegged from day one this season, it seemed. I mean, they're favored by 27.5 against Central Michigan. The computer likes them by 36. Each game that the Nittany Lions have played, they've bettered their rating. So I'm going to go with Penn State this week.
All right. I like it. And yeah, let's do that. I know we give out locks on the college football show, but don't take those. We'll just take a separate play if that's cool with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So there's Dan's. He's going with Penn State. They take on Central Michigan. I have an interesting one, and I like East Carolina. I like East Carolina minus 16.5 over Navy. Navy likes to run the ball, and East Carolina defense, they've actually been pretty solid. You know, the last couple of opponents they've held very limited rushing yards per attempt. So I'm going to take East Carolina at home. They look good. They kind of were on my DNB list for not hanging with really hanging with North Carolina State to open the season. But I like East Carolina here. I know minus 16.5, a fairly big number. I just don't believe in Navy. So kind of a fade Navy play here for me, Dan.
Computer doesn't believe in Navy either. I mean, the computer likes the Pirates by 29. So,
yeah. Yep.
Yeah. I think we're both likely to get a win in this first week.
Yeah. So there we go. All right. So each week we'll give out one of our favorite plays or our favorite play for the week here, week 4. Happy Saturday, of course. That's Dan Angel 11 on Twitter. Again, he drops all his computer rankings, plays, things like that. Who's favorite, things like that. Each week, www.kotasportscappers.com. So Dan, I think this is going to be a good show. It's going to be fun. We're going to drop it every Saturday morning, and I think the people will enjoy it. So again, go give Dan a follow at Kota Cappers. I'm Kota Capper Pace. We'll see everybody in week 5. All righty. Peace.